Hi there, and welcome to this episode of Beyond the Photo with me, Damien Jackson. In this episode, I'm travelling to Ballydowane Cove on the Copper Coast in County Waterford. I'm going to take some photographs of the sea stack there, and I'll also reveal some fascinating facts about the history and background of Ballydowane Cove. So thank you for joining me along the journey, and let's get going. Ballydowane Cove is situated on the Copper Coast, roughly midway between Tramore and Dungarvan. Having said that, it can be tricky to find as there are very few, if any, signposts for Ballydowane. The last one off of the coast road pointing down into Ballydowane has disappeared, probably ends up in some Irish pub overseas. Travelling from the Tramore side, the tricky bit is coming out the far side of Bunman. Instead of following the main coast road as you leave Bunman, you need to turn off left along what's called the Copper Coast Drive. You can easily identify this turn off as you leave Bunman by the thatched cottage situated on the turn. Ballydwane is about 3.5 kilometres from the turn off, and finally you descend a small incline and you'll see this very noticeable evergreen tree on the left of the road, and the left turn to Ballydwane is immediately after that tree. As you can see, the sign that used to be there is missing. If it's your first time at Ballydowane, when you walk onto the beach, you might be a little disappointed that you can't see the sea stack. In fact, you might even think that you're at the wrong beach. From the entrance to the beach, the sea stack is on the eastern end, or your left-hand side as you face the sea. The stack blends into the background of the cliffs from a distance and makes it difficult to see it. It's only when you walk down to it and view it against the sky and the horizon that it becomes prominent. At this stage, the sleet and the rain became too heavy to continue, and I had to beat a retreat to the car. And this provides me with an opportunity to give you a little bit of history and background to Ballydowane. In the early 1800s, the cliffs and area around Ballydowane were mined for copper, silver and lead. There was also a mine that went out under the seabed, and a fascinating fact is that the sea stack that we photographers cherish so much actually has a ventilation shaft to the old undersea mine drilled into it. It's located about 2/3 of the way up the western or the car park side of the stack. The mines and the ventilation shaft are now completely filled with sand. Going back much further in history, Ballydowane is also the site of a promontory fort. Promontory forts are defensive structures that were placed on cliff edges, generally on areas that were surrounded on three sides by steep cliffs. That meant that there was a much reduced need for building ramparts and other defensive constructs, because three sides of the fort were protected by the natural elements of steep cliffs and sea surrounding them. Generally, the remaining side was connected to land by a narrow strip for entrance and exit, and which made defending the fort all the easier. The Copper Coast is dotted with a number of such promontory forts. These are thought to date from the Iron Age, roughly from 500 BC to 300 AD, which is between 2,500 and 1,700 years ago. Research by Pollard et al. In 2020, and I'll leave a link to the article below, suggests that the small island known as St. John's Island, roughly about 40 metres from the eastern headland at Ballydowane Cove, contained a promontory fort. Erosion, which has taken place over the last 1500 to 2000 years, has changed the face of the landscape and it's highly likely that St. John's Island was once connected to the headland by a narrow strip of land, making it an ideal site for a fort. One last interesting fact about St. John's Island is that there is a sea tunnel that goes through the island running in an east-west direction, and it's possible to kayak through it. In fact, I've done it myself some years ago. If the sun is shining into the tunnel and you look down at the seabed, it's an emerald green colour from the deposits of copper littered all around the area. Finally, after spending about 45 minutes in the car, the skies cleared, sun came out, and it looked like a different day. It was at this stage that I knew I had failed miserably on two counts. One, I hadn't checked the tides, and Ballydwane just doesn't work when the tide is out. And two, the bright blue clear skies just meant I wasn't going to get a picture, so it was time just to rethink and come back out again that afternoon. So here's why Ballydowane doesn't work at low tide. As you can see, the tide, when it's out, completely leaves the sea stack surrounded by rocks and seaweed, and it doesn't look in the least bit picturesque. So in terms of visiting Ballydowane, you want your high tide to coincide with either sunrise or sunset, and give yourself maybe a 3-hour window, so you have an hour and a half before high tide and an hour and a half after high tide, and you'll still have plenty of water around the stack at that stage. In terms of light, Ballydowane is pretty much the same as the rest of the Copper Coast, and the best time to photograph it is from October to March. Now here's a graphic showing the sunrise and sunset directions, and I've put the pin on the sea stack itself. Now this is dated the 5th of February because I know we're all in lockdown until the 31st of January at minima, but it gives you an idea that in general, if you want the sun kind of behind the sea stack, and you're better off with a sunset. Now at sunrise it is hidden behind the cliffs as it comes up first, but half an hour or so after sunrise you will see the light on the sea stack itself. Sunrise can also be a very good time for photographing the rock formations on the opposite side of the cove, because you'll be shooting from in behind those into the rising sun as well, and that should give you some nice colour in the sky. I often find that using one of the rocks to blot out the centre of the sun still leaves you with a lot of colour around it as such, without causing flare or burnout. So not to be outdone, I decided to return that afternoon for another go. And there's a nice little bit of light around at the moment, just waiting for sunset. So as you can see, it's a totally different place when the tide is in. All the rocks are covered and the stacks just seem to stand out that much further. Even from here, the sea stack right down along the beach there seems to stand out a little bit more when the tide is in. Another positive point for taking photographs at Ballydowane is the way the waves sweep back into the sea after they come in. Now I don't know whether it's due to the incline or whether there's an underlying current that pulls the water back out, but it leaves this beautiful sweeping action as it retreats, and it's great for, a 1 second exposure. It makes some lovely patterns on the sand. So I've come down to the very eastern tip of the beach, right up against the cliffs, so that I'm actually looking back at the sea stack. I'm setting up here using these rocks as a foreground, and what I'd like to do is catch a splash of a wave as it comes in over the rocks. The only problem is that there's a strong offshore wind, and that's keeping the sea very calm. There are very few large waves coming in. So look, I'll hope for the best anyway. So things are not really working out for me on the splash front. The sea is just too calm, so I'll give it another couple of minutes. I'll move on and try and do something else, maybe with a sweep. There's a nice wave coming now, hopefully. That's the one, hopefully. Yes. Okay. So I think I've got one with the splash. So before I move away from here and come out of this position, I'm going to try a bit of a longer exposure. So I'm going to put on a 6-stop filter and see how I go with that. So the 6-stop filter with the graduated ND is giving me around 20 seconds. So that should smooth out everything around, and we'll see how that goes. Now there's some nice clouds coming up there to the left of the stack, and I'm going to try and get those then with a sweep of the water. I'm going to move back up the beach a little bit, try and get the sweep of the water coming out, and get some of those colours behind the stack. Okay, so that's me finished here. I'm going to start moving back up the beach and try and get a bit of a sweep. One good thing about needing the welly boots for full tide down here is that no one else can get down this end of the beach, because they don't usually come out with the wellies ready to go. So you have a bit of an opportunity to shoot on your own without any disturbance.
So here's a few images from that spot. Nothing spectacular, but I suppose they're decent enough images. The first two are quite similar, both taken at 1/5 of a second. The wave action is a little different in each, but it's a bit disappointing that the sea was so calm. I would have liked a nice strong splash coming up over some of those rocks in the foreground. The last one then smooths it all out with a 20-second exposure. One little tip if you are shooting into the sun is to use the stack to hide the full glare of the sun, so you're not getting burnout and unwanted flare, but yet you're still getting the colour within the sky.
I don't know if you can see in the distance, but the sun is just dipping behind the horizon up at Dungarvan, and I'm just trying to get the little sweep on the sea as it goes backwards here. Okay, fairly happy with that. As you can see, it's a lovely sky in it. Just trying to focus on that little rock that's there as well, right in front, to the left of the sea stack. Fabulous sky here, really lucky tonight. Okay, there's a nice bit of colour still over to the west, or sorry, to the east. So I'm going to spin up that way, go a little bit further up the beach and see how I go for that. The only thing I'm a little bit worried about is that there's a lot of dirt in the water, the seaweed, the kelp I think they call it, and that's part of the sweep back out as well, and I'm hoping that's not going to be ruin the shot. I can't really see it now on the back of the camera, but I'll see it on the computer and I'll know then. Here we go. Okay, so I have a few of those sweeps in the bag, and what I'll try this time is I'll go back to my fast, slow shutter speed, as I call it, around the 1/6 of a second, and see if I can catch the waves that are coming in, just crashing on the same rocks that I'm using for the sweep.
Okay, so if you don't want to see a man running for his life,
Now is a good time to turn away. I had walked back just to adjust the vlogging camera and just a rogue wave came in. A lucky escape. Okay, so what I've done now is I've come back from 2 seconds to 1/6 of a second, and I'm looking for a big wave to just catch it breaking over that rock there in front of me. I'll give it a few seconds, see if I can get a good breaker. So these first two images are of 2 seconds exposure as I attempted to catch the sweep of the water as it retreated after the waves had come in. What's really noticeable is the change in colours and softness of the colours as the sun has gone down compared to the images that I took beforehand when the sun was still up. Although the earlier images are okay, you can see that the sunlight was harsh, and that made for very contrasty images towards these, which are a lot more softer and pastel. So this last one is where I put the shutter speed back up to 1/3 of a second, and I was trying to capture the wave that had crashed over this rock, and I think I was a little bit more successful in this one than I was with the earlier ones. So that's it from me from Ballydowane Cove. Thank you very much for watching. Today I've spent an hour more on the eastern side of the cove photographing the sea star. In the next episode I'm going to the western side to photograph some of the rock formations there, and I hope you'll join me for that. So until then, stay tuned.